Good morning everyone, welcome to the Tuesday Club. I'm Maura Sales and I'm the President of the Otago Settlers Association. And my wee blurb is, welcome to everyone. If you're not a member, you're welcome to join, which you can do at the front desk. Now today we're really lucky, we're going to have some more updates on the Journey to New Edinburgh. We're going to have Seán Brosnahan, who's Toitū Creator, and Will McKee, who's the Toitū Exhibition Developer, talking about some of the experiences of the Journey to New Edinburgh. And a lot of you would have watched it on YouTube, and I'm currently going through the 100 Pioneer Stories, and they're all just so interesting. And I'll give you a bit of feedback. The other day, you talked at the Art Society, Seán, and someone said this is going to be the most boring talk we've ever heard, and they wrote a review and said it was fabulous. So we shall welcome you both.
Good morning, and thank you, Maura, for that lovely introduction. So I'm Will McKee, and of course you'll know Seán, the honorary life member of the Otago Settlers Association. And I just want to point out before we continue that none of this would have happened without the steadfast support of the Settlers Association. A lot of ups and downs in this project that won't go into today, it gets a bit political, but we've had a lot of leadership changes, managers come and go, mayors change and everything like that, and throughout it all we were always able to point to the financial support and of course other types of support of the Settlers Association that really drove this project through. So I want to really acknowledge that and thank you very much. And just looking at this crowd here, a lot of friendly faces here too who have helped us throughout this project as well. Need to make note of a couple of special people too, especially Professor Brooking at the back there, who was one of our talking heads, as Seán likes to call them, throughout this project, who was able to share their knowledge. And also, there's at least 4 or 5 people here. There's Eleanor in the corner over there as well. Mrs. Flockton there. Lots of people who have helped us, and we actually told the story of their ancestors, as well as many other people here too. Now, I need to point out too that I am of Scots and Irish descent, and that comes through in this because one of the big things that we had to do was we had to make a dollar go a long way. And so, as Maura pointed out, one of the things about this project too is we managed to fit a lot into it. So we've got the documentary series, I'll just turn that down, that's peeking a wee bit there. We have the documentary series, which was known as the Journey to New Edinburgh, and of course Pioneer Stories from Southern New Zealand. So Journey to New Edinburgh was 8 parts, and it was based on the origins and the establishment of the Otago settlement. So we really went into the nitty-gritty of that. And the difference is the Pioneer Stories from Southern New Zealand, we focused on individual stories as well. And there was 100 of them, which was a little bit ambitious at the start. Seán said, how many do you want? I said, well, let's go for 100. And we both had a chuckle and said, we'll never do that. Well, here we are. So that was quite something. And it really focuses on that story of what motivated people to leave and what they found when they got here as well. But the key to the whole story is we filmed them both at the same time. Okay, so that made it quite complicated, and luckily Seán's quite clever in this. He had a 36-year head start, and so he really knew these stories very well. Now, I need to acknowledge our team, because here at Toitū, we had lots of behind-the-scenes people helping out, especially our exhibition's graphic designer, Tim Cornelius, who's here in the back row today, and all of the pretty things, basically, he's responsible for. As well as our managers who got a lot of funding across the line. The core roles were these 3 people here. Now, of course, Seán doesn't need an introduction, and there's me in better days, looking happy. And this gentleman on this side here, who you might not see as much of, but that's Chris Quack, and he is a vital component to all of our film productions because he is the AV technician here at Toitū. And I need to do a shout out because this is being filmed, and his mother will be watching this up in Northland, and she's an avid follower of Seán's blog. So that's Chris over there, and in some of these pictures you'll see throughout this morning's talk, you'll see Chris there in all sorts of crazy positions, trying to get a lovely shot of Seán. And for those of you who heard Seán speak before, you'll know that Seán is not a fan of 2 things: dogs and cats. And so fortunately this cat is very safe there, mimicking Chris taking a picture. Now what we're going to do with all these films we're going to make, well, the idea is we put them in our portrait gallery or intersperse them throughout our displays. So those consoles there with many of the ancestral people up on the walls there. The idea is that we'll then be able to press the buttons on these consoles and watch. But then we found they were quite good, so we're actually able to dribble them out on YouTube as well, so people can watch them at your own convenience at home. And then, of course, we've got our new Edinburgh Gallery in the museum, which is the fundamental core of our story here at Toitū. And so that's where we want to, in time, once we refresh that gallery, put the story on display. Now, Seán and I, that's not Scotland, I can tell you right now. That's Seán and I in China in 2016, and I've put the slide in here just to show that this wasn't our first filming project. Obviously, this wasn't our first rodeo. We had done a few of these before, but this was certainly, we'd never attempted anything on this magnitude. And so we had to do a few things in-house again to save dollars, and that included, here's Chris building a sound booth so we could do all of our recording inside the museum. That's him in the workshop, and this is him testing it. And he's quite pleased with himself because it works. And then we got people in, we recorded, so there's that's Gregor Crystal, who's from Campbelltown in Scotland, so he's got a very specific accent. So we got him in to do some of the voice recordings of people that came from Campbelltown. And that also shows that nice sound booth all completed. And there we are, there's Professor Brooking getting ready for his interview. So this brought a really important different voice to our productions, because we had these experts able to share their knowledge accrued over many years on specific migration. And there's Angela McCarthy as well. And this just shows how the setup works in here, but then that's what you would see on TV here as well. So we're a bit sneaky, because obviously that's Dunedin in 1858. Well, we couldn't go back and teleport back then, so we put a nice picture in the background, so we give some sort of historical context as well. And then this is the sort of thing I do. It's a bit boring really, but I piece them all together, use Tim's lovely graphics there, and then would piece the stories together. And then you can see a finalised version up there as well. We'd have a wee map with the location, so that's up in the Umbrella Mountains, deep in darker Southland and Otago. And Seán's up there as well, so it gives that context of where we are. And I might hand over to Seán in a second, and he can talk about the process of how we would actually get amongst these. This is a real action shot here, because you can see I'm in my gumboots trying to avoid a puddle. Seán's crouching down to fit into the camera frame, so we get the name of Langwell Farm. This is in South Otago, where a Sutherland family from Strathbrora up in the top of Scotland. This is where they migrated to. And of course now it's lovely farmland, but back in the day, way in the corner there's a tiny little bit of native bush. And when they arrived, that whole area was covered in that, and that was really hard work for them to clear it, and it really made us appreciate the work that the forebears had put in. And here's Seán up in Kopuwai, old man on the Old Man Range. And the reason I put these pictures in here, because these pictures were taken on the 20th of March 2021. A couple of days before that, we'd been given the green light to go ahead with our local filming. We were ecstatic after a few years of backwards and forwards. And those of you with a good memory will remember what happened 2 days after this, on 23 March, when we went to level 3 lockdown, and the break suddenly hit. So there's a very dishevelled me at home doing some extra research, and I think this would be a good time to bring Seán in, and you can talk about the process of how we put this together, and actually how in some cases the lockdowns were actually a blessing in disguise for us, because it meant we were able to put more work into those individual stories. So away you go, Seán.
Okay, well, when you saw that shot of us in China, we were making our film Journey to La Yuan, which was the story of Chinese migration and settlement to New Zealand. And that was a real privilege to that. We really loved doing it, and it was received very, very well by everybody, but particularly by the Chinese community, and we continue to get wonderful feedback on that. But while we were doing it, Will and I kept thinking, well, this is great that we're doing a story about our Chinese community, but there's another group that we really should apply the same template to. That's the foundation group here in Otago and Southland, the Scots, English and Irish, particularly the Scots. So it became our determined aspiration from 2016 to apply that template of the origin story, the settlement story, to Otago's founding group. And we began to reach out to the Settlers Association, the Scottish Heritage Council and other groups that might want to support it, but also to put together the storylines. You know, so the big overview that's presented in Journey to New Edinburgh, but also the Pioneer Stories, which was entirely Will's idea. He's always trying to sort of cram more into it. So that was quite a substantial thing. But when we got cut off in our tracks with the lockdowns for COVID, we had brought together an overview of what we were going to try and do, and Will had actually booked everything. We were all set to go. We had the airline tickets, the hotel was all booked, all that sort of stuff, and all of a sudden it was off, and we had no idea when, if ever, it would be on again. But the advantage we gained from the delay was that throughout the COVID lockdown, when we were all trapped in our homes, I was actually wandering all over Scotland virtually, and able to draw on lots of digital resources that have become available, particularly things like the census returns, parish records, but most wonderful thing was the maps. The Scottish National Library has digitised thousands of old maps, and they've actually geo-referenced them. Now, geo-referencing means that you can have an old map, and you can pair it with a modern map, and you can switch between them. So in our particular case, because we had identified literally hundreds of locations that we wanted to use as our film backdrops, finding those locations, if we just had to go and look for them on the ground, would be very time consuming, and we didn't have the time to do that. So being able to go ahead of time through the lockdown and map out these georeferenced spots, because you could also save them. So as soon as I found it and picked it out and said, this is the school we want to find, this is the old home, this is the church, I could then lock the two things together, copy the URL at the top and put it into a Word document, so that when we finished, I had 355 locations, all geo-referenced, and day to day on our travels, we could just go clickety-click, and there we had the old map and the new map, and it guided us directly to the spot. So it cut down enormously the amount of mucking around we would have had to do. We had precise locations, we knew how to get there, and that's how we could maximise things, because we did this in 5 weeks. We went to 355 different locations across 3 countries, 4 countries maybe, in 5 weeks. And now that is an incredible logistical exercise. But while I was doing all that, Will was sort of prepping the logistics of it, but he couldn't do the fine tune of it until we got the word to go. He couldn't book the hotels and the flights and all the rest of it. Now, I know this is online, but I've only got a little time to go here. So I can say that the Dunedin City Council is a very risk-averse organisation. So when it comes to reopening international travel for its staff members after a worldwide pandemic, they were very laggardly with making that decision. And we were up hard against a hard date, because that particular year I had been asked to teach a course at the University of Otago in the 2nd semester, taking Angela McCarthy's place while she was doing something else. So I had to be back here to go start teaching on the 12th of July, I think it was, that particular year. So that meant, as we waited for the permission to arrive from high above in the City Council organisation, our time envelope was shrinking and shrinking and shrinking and shrinking. And until we got that word to go, Will couldn't really do anything about the final organisation. And you know how long he got in the end? He got 3 weeks. And he organised all that in 3 weeks, this incredible array of places and all the transport connections between them, the flights to begin with, but then booking ferries. We did a lot of ferry journeys on this journey, hiring the vehicle, all that sort of stuff. And you know, we were a wee bit anxious, because with just 3 weeks to organise it, even with a master logistical man like McKee, you know, was it all going to work? But you know, in tribute to him and his incredible skills in that area, it went like clockwork. There was not a hitch. Every place we wanted to stay at, we stayed at. Every place that we wanted to get to, we got to. The vehicle we got was brilliant. The ferry connections all worked. It was tremendous. So that was the process that we benefited from that delay in one way, and that I could do all that greater research and be better organised. So I think it's a better product for having the delay, but it also added an enormous amount of stress and pressure on the actual logistics of it. Back to you.
So this is just carrying on that logistical talk that Sean's presented there. This might have been a nice quiet day on our filming. It was just, you can see just a few places there, but for those of you who know Scotland, there's quite a bit of travel involved there. However, what it doesn't show is the actual getting to some of these places, of which there was no roads. So when we wanted to go up, for example, a huge big 800 metre high hill to tell the story of the berated Duke of Sutherland, we had to slog it up there. And as you can see, it's actually quite high. And we got up there. You can see here Sean and Chris are smiling because they're on their way down. Oh, not so happy Will going up there. So that's an example of a bit of a quiet day. We still had spent a lot of time travelling, but this was our busiest day. Now that's 40 different places in Edinburgh that we shot. Now just to give a little bit of context here, Seán has to read and recite. Now he's written it, so that's a good head start he's got, but he has to recite 40 different stories about different people or different things that are going on in the establishment of the Scottish Free Church back in 1843. And if he says the word wrong, I'm standing there and, oh, no, do it again, Seán. So I think that's, and a lot of these we're walking around too, and Seán had a sore foot and he'd fallen over the day before in Arthur's seat. So anyway, there was plenty going on. So I'll just pop this in here as another wee example of, we really did, it wasn't all beer and skittles using the Otago Settlers Association's funds. So we did work hard. But it was certainly worth it. There was a lot of very good times. This is in a place called Appin, Ben Curlin, high up on a hillside.
So can I just jump in there?
Oh, here we go.
In terms of the geo-referencing, that would map worked really well just about everywhere. There was one location that was off the maps, and this was it. So it was a burial ground high up on the mountain that was particularly important to James K. Baxter's forebears, the McColls, because this is where his great-great-grandfather's family were all buried. And this old man in his 80s came out to New Zealand with his sons, leaving behind his wife and his 5 children who were buried in that cemetery. And it was quite a sort of emotional wrench. So this is a great significance. And it's also a beautiful spot looking out over the loch. So we're very keen to find this location. But as I say, it was off the maps. So all we had was a rough point on the mountain, and we drove up, parked the car, and all we could do was climb over a fence into the forest and start climbing up the hill and spread out looking for it. Now, the photographs we had as a reference point showed a whole lot of gravestones very clearly with a stone fence around them, easy to see, but we couldn't see it. And we took a couple of hours doing this, and we were getting very frustrated because we had not been defeated at one location to this point, and we were determined that we weren't going to fail here either. So in the end, we went off in 3 different directions, and Will and I were going downhill when we found some remnants of a track and a few bits of building. Oh, I can't be too far away from here. And then we heard Chris way up the top yelling, "Found it!" And you can see that the heather's all grown up, so you couldn't see virtually anything, just a couple of headstones popping out. But that was the most exhilarating achievement location-wise of the whole trip, because we did find it. And we found the first headstone we found was a McColl, and it was like 17 something. So it really rocked in terms of location. The view out over the loch was tremendous, but the achievement of finding it was the key, and we did it. So this is a bit like this here in Otago. So one of the characters in our story, if you've watched the film and seen his individual profile, that has sort of been forgotten about historically in Otago. There's no monuments to anywhere, no one really talks about him. There's a guy called James Adam, who was a passenger on the Philip Lang. And he really was of enormous significance to so many New Zealand families being in New Zealand, because having come here as a pioneer on the Philip Lang, and there's a great story we tell about how that came to be the case, he was the most energetic person on the Philip Lang. He was the first off the ship. He was first into town. He negotiated with some local Maori guys to help him build a house where the Southern Cross Hotel is now. He built his little whare there, brought his family off the ship, set them up in there, and about 2 weeks later his wife gave birth. Incredible, the first child born in Dunedin itself. But he prospered very markedly through his incredible energy and his skills, and within a few years he'd become a well-to-do landowner in his own right, which he could not have done in Scotland. This was, his dreams had been achieved, and he ended up owning a whole lot of land at Adams Flat to begin with, and then eventually over here a little bit further on the Tukumairero. But in 1857, he was sent back to Scotland. Captain Cargill had picked him out to be the representative to go and recruit more people like himself. And he was just a tremendous recruiter, because people could look at him and see, here's an ordinary gadgie. He was a working class man who had done it, and who could tell you from his own experience all the details you might want to know, authoritatively, what land costs, what opportunities there were for labour, all the difficulties, all that sort of thing. He could tell you the real stuff. But in himself, He epitomised what was possible for an ordinary working class man with energy and effort and living soberly and all that sort of stuff. You could succeed. So he was just the exemplar of everything about being a pioneer, and it worked. He recruited 2,000 people in 1857-58, organised 12 ships. People, it's the biggest surge of population in the Pioneer Stories history. And if you go and look in our portrait gallery, there's a whole wall there, which is all just people from 1857-58. They're Adams people. Now, while he was away, his wife died, leaving young children to look after. So when he came back, he withdrew from public life, concentrated on his family. He married again, had more children, and when they grew up a bit, he was available again, and the general government, who is now looking after immigration, sent him back to Scotland in 1870 to do it again, and he did. So thousands more people came to New Zealand because of Adam in that second period, and he also wrote a memoir called 25 Years of Immigrant Life in the Deep South or something. And that book sold widely and inspired many, many more people to come. So if you're talking about the people in Otago, one of the most critical individuals in the whole story is James Adam. Tremendous fellow. Not only that, he was the precentor at First Church. Now, if you don't know what a precentor is, he's the guy that leads the singing in the Presbyterian liturgy, in which, in the Free Church variety, you couldn't have any musical accompaniment. That was just beyond the pale. So it was unaccompanied singing by the human voice, and you could only sing the psalms. But he would strike a tuning fork, and he would sing the first verse of a psalm, and then the congregation would sing it back to him. Beautiful form of singing. So he's a really important guy. But here in Otago, he was buried on his own property, which is called Bon Accord, which is the motto of Aberdeen, which is where he comes from. And we knew that back in the day, this Bon Accord mausoleum was quite the thing. But when we read the family histories and that sort of thing, it said it had been demolished in the 1860s because it had become unsafe. But we went looking for his property anyway, and we found the people living on the farm, and yeah, just over the hill, there's something just over there. His house is gone, all that sort of stuff is gone. So it was one of those places where we didn't think there'd be much historical there, but it was actually the spot, so that's where we want to tell the story. But when we went through the trees, there's his gravestone. Much more than we expected. And I know that now for Will's family, whenever they drive up and down the road to Waikaia, his kids have the job of being the first to spot the little wee sliver you can see on the hillock as you go past, which you wouldn't know unless you knew that it was there. So James Adam, that was another great achievement to find that spot. Maybe not quite as much as Ben Curlin, but really satisfying anyway, because we were so besotted with James Adam. To tell his story well was very important to us.
I just want to move on a little bit to the people that we encountered and helped us throughout these filming missions, because a lot of it, as Seán has pointed out, was done a little bit on the fly. We were able to contact a lot of people in advance, like this chap in the background with me here, who's the caretaker at the Free Presbytery Hall in Edinburgh. Now, luckily I'd sent him an email informing him that we were going to come, but he really put half a day aside for us, and he took us all through this fantastic old building there. We really just wanted to go, if I'm completely honest, because of the painting back here, which you may recognise as the Disruption painting, in which Reverend Thomas Burns is a tiny wee figure in the very corner here. But of course he's our man, so we made sure that we went there and filmed it. But he put the whole day aside, and we were really only there for about 45 minutes. We were, as you saw, that day in Edinburgh was rather pressed for time, but we did make sure we went around, and it just showed that he knew the story. He knew about this sending to a far-flung corner of the world these Presbyterians. He didn't know much about Dunedin, but he knew that we'd gone, so he was really fascinated, and he took us up some very narrow wee stairwells, didn't he? And
Took us out on the roof, gave us a great panorama, which
up on
was
the
great
roof.
from our filming point of view.
And this was a recurring theme throughout, both filming here in Otago and Southland, and also over in Scotland and Ireland and England, would be people that were just, yep, no worries, take us in. It's almost as though, not so much a connection, but they almost felt a duty at times, that, especially in Scotland, they felt, well, you're the ones that got sent away or had to go away. You were the third or fourth or fifth or 23rd sons and daughters that had to migrate. And so they felt a purpose of making sure we were looked after. This is more locally in Dunedin here. This is up at Lundy Street, which is the oldest house in Roslyn. And Graham and Faye gave them a phone call. Look, would you mind if we came and told the story of this house? Because I think it's called Brown Street at the time. And it's, like I said, the oldest house, and they've really looked after it very well. And that could be a bit intrusive, someone ringing up saying, do you mind if we come and film at your house? But no worries at all. They took us aside and in we went. This is back in Old Moncton, and this is the church that was called Burns's Folly. The Reverend Thomas Burns, before he migrated, before he did the breakaway with the Free Church, he built this great church in Old Moncton, and so that's, you may have heard Seán say about he had this very, to a degree, cushy job with a brand new church, but no, Burns, he held strong to his convictions. But anyway, we went and knocked on the door, and this guy let us in and showed us around, and it's a different denominational church now, but the church is still there, and there's a plaque on the outside, and it was very nice of them to take the time. And this is our former archivist here, Jenny Chen, and of course in the background there is what remains of Port Molyneux down in South Otago. Many of you will understand that Port Molyneux was an important place in that sort of later period of before it got flooded out in 1875 in South Otago. Port Molyneux was quite the place, and it's next to the large hundreds, which is where people that bought Otago land packages, they'd had their 100 acres down there in South Otago. So we did a lot of filming down there. And Seán thought it was a great idea for Jenny, as the archivist, to come along to understand where all these wee places are now that people won't even understand. Places like Warrapa or Te Hauka, all those little South Otago places which really were its own community back in the day. Good thing for an archivist to understand where they are, save her a lot of time, and she had a great time with us as well. Back in Scotland...
Can I interrupt here?
Go on.
We couldn't contact people ahead of time for 355 locations. We didn't know who lived in these places. We didn't have any contact addresses. The Free Church Hall was unusual in that respect. So what we had to do was just rock up on the day, knock on the door and ask permission. So a random stranger will come to your location and say, can we film here? So our secret weapon was Will McKee with his Waikaia farmer style. So here's what he'd do. So Chris and I would hide in the car with all our equipment. Will would get out and he'd go up to the door, knock on the door, and someone would open and he would just go, Will McKee from New Zealand, hand outstretched. Now, the magic words there weren't Will McKee from, it was New Zealand. Every time we said New Zealand, people lit up appreciatively and welcomed us. It was the magic words, and he did it again and again and again, and, you know, they'd be bewildered for sort of the stranger. New Zealand, oh, New Zealand, we're open to that. And so often, those people had some direct personal connection to New Zealand or to Otago. You know, the son or daughter lived there. You know, their son had played rugby there. Over and over again, these very close, recent personal connections happened. But there was one place where the McKee style failed, and this is it. So while he was out of the car, Chris and I were hiding in the car, and he went down and knocked on the door, and we thought, what's going on? The person didn't open the door. He was having to negotiate through an intercom to the door, and it went on and on. So we got out and thought, oh, we'll just get ready. And then this guy came out of the house. He saw us, and he came over and said, what are you up to? So we explained, and the house we were looking for was his house. And when we told him about this project, he said, oh, no worries, that's great. And he was very into the history. But the reason for the reticence of his neighbour, this is in a little place called Temple. Now, Temple was associated with the Knights Templar, and because of a guy called Dan Brown writing some ludicrous fantasy about it all, there had been a lot of oddball Americans who had been shown up at this village, and locals become very wary of strangers appearing and getting out of cars and asking weird questions. So they become very, you know, guarded. And that's why he struck the no opening the door policy of the man down the back. But our bloke here, no, couldn't be more helpful, but he explained his background. So that's, I'm surprised you put that up, because that's the time when it didn't work. But we got there anyway, and, you know, great story told there in that place.
Just proves we're all flawed geniuses. So, yes, that gentleman's name is Tam, and Tam was more than willing to help us, and I really thought this was a good slide, not because of the story of the intercom, but we had one record which showed that was where Adam Wright was from. Now, Adam Wright was one of the first schoolmasters out in Green Island Bush, and unfortunately he ended his days in what was called the lunatic asylum here, so things went wrong for him upon arrival in New Zealand, and that was the whole, really, we weren't just telling happy stories here, we were really trying to give a good overview picture of what the struggles were. But we had the one record, because they started doing the census in Scotland in 1841, and it showed that he was living there. with a maid servant who suspiciously had their child 6 months later, and then they emigrated. And I've been able to backwards and forwards email Tam, who's talking to me there in the picture, and he loved that story. He knew none of that sort of history, and he shared it with his village. So I think things like that are quite special when we hear that those wider stories as well. Now, many of you will be familiar with the place St Bathans in Greater Central Otago. Well, this is Abbey St Bathans in the Scottish borders. And the gentleman I'm talking to here, I'm just getting his email address because that's a whole nother story. There was a vintage car rally going through, the road was about to be blocked, we had to do our filming, meet this guy, do it all in 20 minutes.
And get out, or they were going to lock us in for a couple
We
of
were
hours.
going to be stuck there, and we couldn't spend those 2 hours stuck anywhere. But anyway, this gentleman is John Turnbull Thompson's great-great-great-grandnephew. And he just happened to be walking past, saw us filming, I got chatting to him. Now, this was a Church of Scotland building, but they had to sell it, and so living in the neighbourhood, family purchased it because this is all their ancestors buried there, so they just didn't want it being sold to anyone. So he was a really great person to meet and have a chat to, and he knew a little bit about this famous forebear in New Zealand, but not a heck of a lot. So I've been able to send back to him the story about John Turnbull Thompson, and I think now he's got a greater respect of just what his forebear did over here in New Zealand. But that's a beautiful place, and it's great to go to these places. Of course, J.T. Thompson then went on and named lots of places around Otago, Southland, the lower South Island, after places like this. It's quite different from St Bathans, I will say, in Otago, but beautiful nonetheless. Back here in Dunedin, this is the Borton Cottage, the Fern Tree Cottage up in Wakaree. And of course, this couple here have taken on an enormous task to try and refurb that cottage, which is the oldest fern tree cottage in...
Well, it's the oldest house in Dunedin.
Oldest house in Dunedin. And they also very happy to take us on board because we really needed to show and get across how people lived when they got here. You know, they had to make do with whatever they had, and grabbing pungas and strapping them together and making a house was basically one of the three main types of living. So you see Chris is looking very clean shaven there too, so that's quite a rare picture. This scruffy mob up here, we've got my father and brother who took us way up into the Old Man Range, up into Argyle Station, where we did a lot of filming up there because it was pretty raw and rugged, and it kind of showed a little bit of some of the high country, how it might have been when some of those early, particularly a little bit later in the 1850s, when some of the gentlemen started going way up there with their sheep, and their poor women folk being stuck alone for a long time. So we really had to talk about how life was back then compared to now. But also I was very appreciative of James and John there taking us up, and also great to have John here today. And Sean, you probably want to talk about this, about the Weaver's Stone in Lindsay and your friend.
So when we go to these places, you know, having a local knowledge is really great. And one of our great friends here at Toitū over a long period is David Forsyth, who was formerly the curator at the National Museum of Scotland. And back in 1998, he spent 6 weeks here at the museum preparing an exhibition. It was supposed to be about Scots in New Zealand, and he was supposed to go to museums all over the country. But he got here and stayed here. And the exhibition ended up being just about Otago. It was called Altogether a Delightful Country, and was on at the National Museum of Scotland for a couple of years, taking a lot of treasures from our collection. He came back again when we did our Scots and our Dunedinbury exhibition a few years ago, and again was very helpful. Now he's retired now, but he took us around Kirkintilloch, a little village near Glasgow, which is very important to our story. The people in the cottage that we've replicated here came from Kirkintilloch, so that sort of story of handloom weavers who became redundant, had to come out and start again, the Buchanans. Now he's a Kirkintilloch man, so was his father and his grandfather, so it's tremendous. And that little stone there is called the Weaver's Stone. And the Weavers were well known for their firm political discussions, and they used to sit on a stone like that, communally reading a newspaper and then having big, political discussions and arguments. And you don't find any reference to that, anything about Kirkintilloch, but David told me about it, so we went and filmed part of our story about the Buchanans around the Weaver's Stone at Lindsay there. So great to have someone like David who could give us that inside knowledge. Marjorie Harper, another very useful source. Esteemed historian of Scottish migration of the diaspora. Tom will know her, I'm sure. She's been to Dunedin. I've shown her around here, and I've took her around the Southern Cemetery. So she reciprocated when we went to the University of Aberdeen. This is in Ireland. we did a strand on the greening of Otago, as I like to call it, the coming of Irish Catholics here in the late 1850s, and the very first person to break through the Presbyterian cordon around Otago and begin a migration chain from this particular parish, Annandale in County Galway, was a guy called William Cabinet, and that's where he left from. That's his family cottage. And the woman in front of it who put it all together, she's the president of the Annandale Historical Society. He's her forebear, and she owns the cottage. Not her forebear, her relation. You know, she's descended from his sister. So, you know, when I asked Irene, "Can you help us?" You know, "Oh yeah, I own it." So she took us straight to us, and we were able to film more out of it. And on the right-hand side, that's my Brosnahan connections there from County Kerry, and that's the track up to my great-great-great-grandmother's family home way up in the hills at Grandora. And yeah, they were our connections there. So having those connections really helpful, and these people loved our project, and we're very happy to help us on the way. Oh, and then locally, of course.
Ray, yeah.
Is Ray here? No, Ray's not here. He usually shows up at these events. Ray Beardsmore. He owns Woodside, that beautiful old house there that was built by one of our pioneer stories, Francis McDermott. And having Ray, let us get access to it and give us lots of background things, very helpful. So we had lots and lots of friends with the project, and we really appreciated all their assistance.
Right, just about home time. But I guess the last or second to last thing I really need to give an overview is the importance to this whole project of Seán. Don't want to give him a big head, but like I said, we were pretty lucky with the team we had, because this guy here, Chris with his brilliance with all of the technical side of things, and Seán with his being able to regurgitate knowledge very amicably, does mean that we were able to do so much content. And of course, a lot of people, "Oh, you didn't do my ancestor." Well, we did do 100, so we've done a really good sample there, as well as the actual documentary of the 8 parts there as well. So people should be able to find themselves somewhere in one of those stories if you've got Scottish or Irish ancestry from the 1800s. Now, without these guys, we wouldn't have been able to do that much, but also, again, need to pay tribute to all of our supporters who made sure that we could get it across the line. Now, Seán's just going to give a brief outro here, the importance, because we all understand, we can all make connections to, might not be Irish or Scottish, but basically everyone came here at some stage, got here in a plane or boat, so we could all relate to that tale of migration. And Seán, do you want to talk about the old hundredth?
Yeah, okay. So when the settlers arrived here on the Philip Lang in 1848, when they got off the boat, they were super grateful because they'd made it, 5-month journey, epic, and here they were in the new land, ready to start. So they sang a psalm in gratitude, the old 100th psalm, and that thereafter became their theme song. Whenever pioneer gatherings were held, they always sang the old 100th. That carried on right through the big jubilees. Now, I think it was the 65th jubilee of the anniversary day. They had a gathering here at the Early Settlers Hall, and one great old pioneer, James Adam, was there, and he told lots of stories about the early days, and then he led them one more time in singing the old 100th, and 3 days later he died. So it was great swan song for James Adam. And I think it's incumbent upon us to remember these pioneers with gratitude for their fortitude, for their bravery, for all the things they did to make Otago what it is, because without them, we wouldn't be what we are today. We stand on the shoulders of giants and giantesses. And I would invite you now, as we finish this talk, to stand, and we'll sing together the old 100th. Now, you'll know the tune. It's "All creatures that on earth do dwell." Easy to sing, so let's give it a shot. All people that on earth do dwell, sing to the Lord with cheerful voice. Serve him with joy, his praises tell. Come now before him and rejoice. Know that the Lord is God indeed. He formed us all without our aid. We are the flock he comes to feed. The sheep
like to share my thanks. I think the Journey to New Edinburgh and the Pioneer Stories are such a treasure, and they're so worth going back and watching multiple times, and they've been so well done. So thank you so much, you two, Seán and Will, for coming.
Thank you.